Hi, I'm Peter Tufano, and I'm thrilled to welcome you here to the finals of the Map the System competition. The world is facing a lot of huge problems. We have a pandemic, we have an economic crisis, we have a humanitarian crisis, we have a civil liberties set of crises. We have fault lines on the basis of race that have been exposed. They're always there, but even more extreme. We have national differences that are exposed. And on top of that, we have the full set of the UN SDGs that still need solving, and especially the climate crisis. The world has never needed our brain power and our work to try to solve these problems. But you can't solve a problem unless you understand it. You can't get to your destination unless you have a map. And therefore, what we're all collectively doing in this Map the System competition is to slow down and understand where it is that we can make a difference. The problems that I just mentioned, they're so complicated, as you well know, sometimes called wicked problems. They have economic elements, they have political elements, they have educational elements, they have health elements, and more. They are just these Gordian knots. And the only way we're going to cut them is if we can kind of understand exactly the structure and not think that there's a single solution, something at the end of an 80-minute case discussion or a PowerPoint presentation that's going to solve those problems. But rather, we're going to have to find a variety of strategic intervention points. And for each of those strategic intervention points, find out what we can do. And then from there, collectively, we can begin to address those problems. And that's the work that lies ahead. That's the work that you've been doing in this Map the System competition. That's the work that we do at the school as well. Our students, as part of our required curriculum, go through a program called Global Opportunities and Threats Oxford, or GO-TO, run by Dr. Peter Drobik, who you'll hear from in a moment. So we take our own medicine. We want to be part of the solution to these problems. And therefore, we're doing exactly the same process that you've all been doing. I have a big thank you to my staff who's been putting this together, but a thank you to you, to the participants, for giving us your time, for spending your time probably when you had so many other things to do and probably in the middle of a complicated lockdown situation. I want to thank the educators who are part of this across 50 different schools for ensuring that we work together with our students to try to look for these strategic intervention points. I want to thank our partners. The Canadian edition is supported by the McConnell Foundation and the Institute for Community Prosperity and the Trico Charitable Foundation. And the global edition is supported by the Skoll Foundation and by the Immersi Foundation. We're all in this together. It takes brilliant ideas. It takes careful thinking. It then takes action orientation in order to make progress on these various things. But I am convinced, I am hopeful. In these days, sometimes one of the things that can be in short supply is hope. The world seems like it's in a strange place. Where are we going to find hope? I think where we're going to find hope is in all of you, in you taking the time to do this, in us collectively examining these solutions, in us collectively trying to advance this work. So my hope comes from you today. So I'd like to thank you for that gift that you've given me today. I'd like to hand it over now to our global supporter from the Immersi Foundation, our alum and very good friend, Mohammed Immersi.
Thank you very much, the Dean, Peter Tufano. Thank you, Peter Drobik, Director of Skoll, all the participating institutions, judges, the participants, and last but not least, the organizers. Greetings to all of you, whichever time zone you may be in now. My foundation and I have had the pleasure of being involved with this amazing initiative for a few years now. And it's a privilege to once more address this fantastic stakeholder group in the most trying of circumstances. I will take the opportunity to describe how within our foundation we analyze the global systemic initiatives and the leadership that is required to give effect to it, and then follow that up with how we are trying to apply these learnings to a current situation. Our learnings are derived from many sources and experiences and many education institutes like Harvard, Stanford, Said, and many others. I guess the easiest starting point for us is the 2030 SDGs, comprising the 17 goals, each of which represents complex systems such as climate, food, health, cities, each with multiple stakeholders. Trying to implement these require a departure from the traditional top-down, bottom-up, hierarchical, and linear approaches to implementing change. Instead, it will be innovative, agile, and adaptive approaches, broadly engaging a multitude of networks of diverse stakeholders who are all sharing an aligned vision that will definitely result in change being catalyzed. Each of the competing teams here today, and there are some amazing initiatives that I had the chance to review, are and have the potential within them to provide the requisite leadership that is needed to achieve systemic change. To be successful, experience has shown us in our foundation that such leadership requires a set of skills and capacities that comprise at least three interconnected elements. Firstly, it's the individual, the skills of collaborative leadership to enable learning, trust building, and empowered action among stakeholders who share a common goal. Secondly, it's the community. This is the tactics of coalition building and advocacy to develop alignment and mobilize action among stakeholders in the system, both externally and internally between organizations. Thirdly, it's the system itself. And this requires an understanding of the complex systems, as Peter Tufano alluded to, that underpin the challenge that one is addressing. We found that these can best be summarized by what I call, and this is something from Harvard, the CLEAR framework for catalyzing systems change. The CLEAR acronym, CLEAR, in our view, stands for one, convene, C for convene and commit. Under this, it's important that stakeholders engage to address a complex issue of mutual concern by defining shared interests and goals and committing to working together in new ways to create dynamic and sustainable systemic change. L stands for look and learn. Through system mapping, stakeholders jointly build a shared understanding of the components, the participants, the dynamics, and influences that create the system, giving rise to new insights and ideas. E in CLEAR stands for engage and energize. Diverse stakeholders are engaged through continuous communication to build trust, commitment, innovation, and collaboration. A is for act with accountability. Shared goals and principles set the direction of the initiative, while measurement and evaluation protocols and frameworks help track the progress. M&E is very important for us and for many others like us. R is for review and revise. Stakeholders need to review progress regularly and adapt their strategy accordingly, permitting for evolution, adaptation, and experimentation. We found with a number of management teams that when applying this framework that I've just described, initiatives that are truly focused on driving systemic change will find that they and their leadership discover along journeys paradigms such as no one is in control, it's up to us, everything is connected, this is our edge. To go far, we need to go together. Where there is a will, there is a way. We can make a lasting difference. We need collaboration and coordination. Wow, change is happening, and we are in this together for the long haul. I will now apply these learnings to the COVID-19 situation. that is still very much a developing situation and share some of our learnings from it. My foundation has played a pivotal role in addressing many aspects of it. Firstly, we have all been humbled to accept that we are all equal, regardless of our culture, religion, occupation, financial situation, or how famous we are. This disease treats us all equally, but it is worth noting that while we are all sailing in this storm, in the same storm, some of us are in yachts and others are in canoes. We are all reminded that we are all connected, and something that affects one person has an effect on another. It has reminded us that artificial borders that we have erected have little value, as this virus does not need travel documents in order to travel. Accordingly, important to know that none of us is safe until we are all safe. We are reminded by being oppressed by the virus for a short time of all those who live in permanent oppression. Events of the last 2 weeks in the US, the UK, and all over the globe has demonstrated that very well. The virus has reminded us of how materialistic our society has become, and how, when in times of difficulty, we remember that it's the simple essentials that we need as opposed to the luxuries that we incessantly consume. We are beautifully reminded as to what it means to come together by staying apart, and how important our family and home life is, and how much we have been neglecting this. It is forcing us back into our houses so we can rebuild them into homes, and to strengthen our family unit. As they say, the family that sweats together stays alive together, or at least they have a fighting chance. Whereas many have seen the COVID-19 virus as a disaster, we have seen it as a great corrector and a timely corrector. I think I will stop here now as my time is up, and I wish all the participants the very best of success. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. That was really thoughtful, insightful, and inspiring. We really are grateful that you're here with us once again this year. For those who don't know, we've been doing Map the System now for several years. Once upon a time, it was called the Global Challenge. And Mohammed and the Mercy Foundation took a bet on us way back in the very beginning. And look where we've come to today with 3,500 teams of students, 54 university partners around the world at a moment where systems thinking and systems leadership was never more important. So Mohammed, we thank you for that. Mohammed will be staying with us, and we'll see him again towards the end of today's event. I just want to add my own welcome and greetings and hello. My name is Peter Drobik. I'm the director of the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship. I'm here in Oxford in the UK, where it is predictably raining. So if you hear some thunder in the background, I can't change it. That's what happens around here as part of the magic of Oxford. We wish, of course, that you could all be here with us this week, as we've come to enjoy in previous years. Of course, that's not possible. Our fingers are crossed we'll be able to convene here again soon. And before we get any further, I just want to thank you for being here, but also to wish you and your families all well, and hope that you're safe wherever you are during these really difficult times. Map the System is an initiative, as I mentioned, of the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship that's now been running for several years. The Skoll Center is one of the world's oldest academic centers for social impact, at least at a major university in the world. We've been around for going on 2 decades, and we exist very simply to advance entrepreneurial solutions to the world's most pressing problems, and do that through teaching and training, through research, and by bringing people together, by convening as we are today. And we believe that an important part of the social entrepreneurs toolkit is systems thinking, that's really an important superpower for addressing these kinds of complex problems. And that's what Map the System is all about. we observe that so many of the business plan competitions and the social change competitions were very solutions oriented. And what you'd often come to are these very unsatisfying solutions that sounded very kind of silver bullety. But when you really look under the surface, you realize that's not going to have the kind of impact that we really hope to, that we need to slow it down and be a bit more humble. And that's what this is really all about. So this is, in some ways, has a look and feel like a lot of other competitions. But what we're looking at, as you'll see today, is something quite different. So that these teams that we're going to be hearing from today are going to be really assessed on their understanding of the problem, their communication of the nature of the problem, and identifying some of those leverage points or strategic intervention points. It's less about the solution than really understanding the problem. And that's really the first step towards systems leadership. So as I mentioned, this year is by far the biggest year for Map the System yet. The way the process works is that, the Skoll Center and Said Business School here in Oxford act as sort of conveners and curators of the program, but it's a global learning program. We work in concert with universities and educators around the world. As I mentioned, we had 54 universities participating in Map the System this year from 6 continents. We're working on the University of Antarctica so we can have the 7th and final continent. If anybody knows someone at the University of Antarctica, please give me a call. But this is really exciting, and it's a big increase from even last year. And I think that the world is more and more waking up to the fact that, that, as Mohammed said, we're all connected, and that we need to use this kind of problem-solving approach if we want to blaze a path forward. So each of those universities runs their own Map the System program, and several universities do that as we do here in Oxford through a course where students do it as part of their learning in a leadership course or a course on social innovation. In other universities, it's run as a co-curricular sort of program and competition where students can have some guidance outside of the classroom, but work a bit more independently. And then in some places are kind of blended together. You have a lot of flexibility for universities to manage this the way they want to. Students elect to participate. They form teams themselves, usually teams of up to 5 students or recent alums. They are allowed to have non-students on their teams as well. We really value the voices of lived experience of the problem. And so if a team feels that they can bring in additional kind of expertise and particular lived experience from someone who's not a student, but really understands the issue that they're working on, that's absolutely welcome and encouraged. And students choose the social or environmental issue that they care about, that they want to work on. And they have been putting in the work over many, many months now, in some cases really 6 months. And you'll see hundreds of hours of work and research and interviews and mapping that went into this process. And you're going to see the fruits of that today. From those 54 universities, we had 3,500 teams of students participating this year, which is really extraordinary when you take a step back and think about it. Now, not every team was able to finish. Obviously, in the middle of this program, we all faced the disruption of the pandemic. But out of those 3,500 teams, 31 teams made it here to the global final, which actually started on Monday. And so we've been working together with our fantastic judges, who you'll hear from in a moment, to whittle those 31 teams now down to 6 finalists who we're going to hear from today. My colleague, Anna Johnson, who runs the Map the System program for us here in Oxford, though she happens to be in Canada at the moment, sheltering in place, will tell you more about the details. But before we do that, I want to quickly introduce our judges. And as I mentioned, we have 6 really phenomenal judges from all around the world, real expert systems thinkers from very different backgrounds. I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves. Judges, we're going to go in alphabetical order by first name. So we'll start with Becky, then Ed, then Jill, then Joe, then Josiane, and finally Sharon. We've got lots of J's. And tell us who you are in your current position. And if you could just briefly share one thought about something that stood out for you during your first 2 days of judging so far, we'd appreciate that. Becky, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks so much, Peter. Hi, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here. My name is Becky Ryder, and I work at the Omidyar Group, where I lead our internal systems and complexity consulting practice. So I was lucky enough to be a judge last year as well. And what's really sticking out to me from last year comparing to this year is that this year, I think it really became a systems and complexity competition. And what I mean by that is this year teams looked at systems, but in doing so, they used systems and complexity mindsets and tools. And that really made the difference this year. So should I be lucky enough to be invited back next year? I'm not quite sure how much further this competition can take it, but I'm really, really excited to be here and to stick with the journey.
Thanks,
Hey,
Becky.
I'm Ed Straw. I'm a visiting research fellow at the Open University at the Applied Systems Thinking in Practice group, where I specialize in systems of governing and how those should change. And we've produced 26 principles for systemic governing throughout the world. The thing that struck me about this project, which I'm incredibly grateful to be part of, is on the one hand, as you go around the world, everything is different and everything is the same. So homelessness in Vancouver, recycling in Ghana, adolescent pregnancy in Peru, menstruation everywhere. Actually, these are common worldwide problems. And I can recognize those, albeit the circumstances may be different. And the opportunity, therefore, is for many of the solutions and the systemic responses that are being produced to go around the world.
Hello, my name is Jill Andrews, and I am with you today from Winnipeg, Canada, where I am a consultant. I spend a lot of time in community, particularly in different communities across Western Canada, working with people on transformational systems level changes here. I am so grateful to be back and be part of the Map the System Challenge. And what impressed me last year, continues to impress me this year, is that this is not an academic exercise. So while it is centered on post-secondary institutions from different parts of the globe, there is the potential and indeed an urgency for substantive change. And as Peter said, systems leadership, systems thinking, systems change is needed now more than perhaps it's ever been needed. So the time for this is now. The other thing that's been really standing out to me is the different lenses on these complex challenges, and also the importance of the understanding of our own position within these systems. And last thing I'll say is that if we're not feeling uncomfortable, we're not doing it right. We're not really pushing the boundaries towards transformational change. And I think so many of the groups here are really working to push boundaries. It's just incredible.
Great. My name is Joe Xue. It's great to be here with you all today. I'm the founder of the Complexity and co-founder of Academy for System Change. Complexity is the complexity without the C. And the reason we call it complexity, symbolize the first sound of universe. Symbolize that system change is not only out there, but in here. And what impresses me these 2 days is the enthusiasm and the amount of care the student exhibit in their projects. I have done more than 60 systems mapping projects around the world, helping stakeholders using the mapping tool to see the complexity. One critical success is not the most sophisticated analysis, but whether you really care. You really care deeply about the system, being with the people. And what I've seen from the students, they care. You guys care about the issue that you are working so hard at. I can tell from your presentation how you answer your questions. So really, really appreciating that.
Yes, thank you, Joe. That's beautifully said. Hi, everyone. I'm Josie-Ann Smith, and I work with the Social Innovation Exchange here in London. And I lead on our systems thinking training for foundations around the world and do some of our ecosystem building work globally. And before that, I had a fairly interesting short short enough career in the Middle East, doing social development and systems change work, which really informs, I think, the biggest takeaway that I have from all these incredible submissions the past few days, is that every systems map seemed to be slightly different, even if it was on the same issue. And it made me realize that, who you are affects what you see. And then it just kind of reminded me of the strongest submissions were those that had really diverse thinking in their research, and also understood the importance of collaboration to really surface the different lenses that people were using to approach the kind of social issue. But it's been very inspiring. That's the big takeaway.
Oh, unmute, Sharon. Sharon, can you unmute?
I am unmuted.
There you go. You're good now.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm joining you from Adelaide, South Australia. I'm Sharon Zivkovic. I've got a foot in academia. I teach social entrepreneurship, but my passion is practice. I'm the founder of the Social Enterprise Community Capacity Builders and the co-founder of another social enterprise, Wicked Lab. And one takes a systems thinking approach and the other one takes a complexity science approach. I think what I found really inspiring from the past couple of days is and it came through the Q&A sessions, was the in-depth understanding of the complexity of the issues that people were understanding through the process of this competition. And I think the other thing that I found as a practitioner, which I found really exciting, was the number of participants who said that now that they understand these issues so well, they want to actually take action in addressing them, but addressing them with a systems lens. And I find that really, really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you all. Welcome again. We've so enjoyed working with you over the last couple of days, and you've got a big responsibility coming up this afternoon. And all of you in the audience do as well. Remember, there will be an audience vote today, and so you have a chance also to weigh in and support a team. And to tell you more about that and what to expect for the rest of today's event, I want to turn it over to my pal and my colleague and the mastermind behind all this, Anna Johnson.
Hi, thank you, Peter. Thank you, judges. Thank you, Mohammed and Mercy, and especially thank you to Dean Peter Tufano for joining us. It's great to be here with you today, while virtually. Today marks the third and final day of the global final event. So for the past 2 days, teams have come together virtually to present issues they care deeply about. And while under normal circumstances, we'd be gathering in person, I think the transition to a virtual event has proved that a sense of community and connectedness can be created no matter how far away you are. So to all the 31 teams, I want to thank you for your energy and your passion, positivity, and for bringing a virtual event to life. So after very difficult deliberation yesterday, the judges selected 6 teams to present here today at the final round. The top 6 teams must now present the context of their challenge using a systems thinking lens, highlighting only the most important aspects of their systems analysis in just 5 minutes. It's very difficult already. Each team will present for 5 minutes and will be joined by the judges for live Q&A for another 5 minutes. And then we'll hand it over to the next team to present. After the 6 teams have presented, we're going to have an opportunity for you to participate today, as Peter said, so you get to vote. So please do pay attention, your vote does count. And then we'll explain, when we get to that stage, we'll explain how that works. During the judge deliberation, we're actually joined by a very, very special guest, Margaret Wheatley. I'm a huge fan and I'm really excited for her to share some thoughts during the deliberation for a keynote. So at this time, we'd like to kick things off, and I'll hand it over to Peter to introduce the first team.
Terrific. So we are going to have we're going to have 3 teams present and do the Q&A. Then we'll have a very short break, and then we'll do the final 3. We are going to pace ourselves and stay on time. And so to kick things off, and these teams, of course, are presenting in no particular order. Our friends from the Ashesi University in Ghana. This is Lloyd, Nadine, Munyarati, Denver, Marshall, and they'll be telling us about their project on poor plastic waste management in Accra, Ghana. Welcome, Ashesi.
Hello, we are African Transformers and we are presenting on poor plastic waste management in Accra, Ghana. African Transformers is a team of 5 engineering students that are passionate about plastic waste management. This problem is important to us because 70% of plastics imported and produced in Ghana end up as waste, and only 2% of this waste is recycled.
The plastic waste cycle consists of distributors such as plastic manufacturing companies that are then disposed and they're collected, sorted, and recycled and reused and put back into distribution.
The impacts of plastic waste are environmental, social, and economical. In 2015, a flood resulted in 152 deaths and the destruction of property worth $23,000 to choked cutters. Plastics also hinder fishing activities in Accra.
Under the solution landscape, we have a couple of existing solutions, which include itinerant waste buyers commonly found in Accra, who are engaged in collection and marketing of sorted plastic waste. Then we have municipal waste collectors, with Sumlion being the biggest, and small-scale plastic waste pickers. We also have cleanup campaigns organized by individuals, NGOs, local churches, and different institutions. The recycling companies such as Necoplastics that mainly buy plastic bottles and sachets. And lastly, NGO-driven workshops to raise awareness.
Post mindset is the biggest thorn in the flesh. However, it is being fueled by other factors such as poverty that demotivates people from caring about the environment, as indicated by one of our interviewees, a vendor who earned an equivalent of $4 per day. Also, cheap plastics influence vendors to give out plastic bags for free due to the low startup capital and low prices in the plastic production industry. And lastly, government and environmental agencies' poor implementation of educational programs on waste management. Other factors include lack of recycling facilities, unnecessary imports due to the increase in demand for plastics from the fast-growing population, and the government's less restrictions on those plastics importations.
Our study of existing solutions has helped us to identify the following gaps. Firstly, waste collecting companies fail to segregate their waste and are inconsistent in their visits to communities. As such, we suggest that localized designated bins be placed in various communities across Accra. Also, the government has not been effective in enforcing plastic waste management policies, so the government can make companies and individuals more responsible by introducing plastic tax and a monitoring system that allows companies to be more accountable. Similarly, informal waste collectors are not recognized and are paid little for their services. So connecting them with recycling companies and providing the right documentation that allows them to sell at minimum selling rate would help to close up this gap. For recycling companies, they tend to focus on a smaller range of plastics, and so introducing extended producer responsibility and standardization of recyclable plastics will help them get better. Companies that depend on plastic packaging tend not to have localized collection sites, and they dispose of waste improperly through methods such as burning, and so establishing a network at the community level with waste collectors and collaborating with companies that reuse and recycle plastics will be helpful in closing up the gaps. The last gap that we identified is that NGOs are not consistent in carrying out sensitization campaigns, so we suggest the use of social media to increase the frequency of these campaigns.
This is our insight maker. To your left are stakeholders that add plastic waste in Accra, such as vendors wrapping goods using plastic, and to your right are stakeholders that remove plastic waste from Accra, such as municipal waste collectors and recycling companies. In our variable list, both the plastic taxes and the incentives, they are all in terms of percentages. So when they increase, their percentage increases. Currently, there's a total of 800 metric tons of plastic waste in Accra. And to start with, I'm going to simulate a situation where only the active 7 recycling companies are present and the percentage of 0.01 of the incentive. So simulating the result, we can see that it takes approximately 6 years to reach a constant value of 0 metric tons in Accra. Now, as we demonstrated previously in one of our levers, if we increase the incentive to 0.05 and then simulate, we can see that there's an improvement in the time taken to reduce the plastic waste to 0, now taking approximately 5 years. This is due to an increase in the number of waste collectors as well that are picking the waste from Accra.
Our key insight is that the proposed solution should blend with the normal lifestyle of people. Our research method consisted of both primary and secondary sources. We express our special thanks to Insight Maker and Splash and Slides Canva. Thank you.
Thank you, Team Asheshi, for that terrific presentation. Let's turn it over to our judges for the Q&A, please.
Thank you, Team Asheshi, for the presentation. It was fantastic. I've got the pleasure of asking the first question, and the first question is, how did you go about choosing the systems tools that you have used for your project?
Thank you very much. I would take that question. The first thing we wanted to look at was how best we can represent the different stakeholders that are within our system. We noticed that our problem cuts across about 4 SDG goals, which is SDG number 6, 11, 13, and 14. And what this means is that it's a very complex problem, and it not only affects land, sea, but also the air when these plastics are being burned. And we decided to use Insight Maker because it allowed us to model the different inputs into our system, which is the plastic waste system in Accra. And it allowed us to also model the outputs. And so one main factor that we used was how best we can quantify the findings that we had made from our research and from the interviews we had with various stakeholders, such as the waste collectors, and even from the research papers that we found online and what was already existing. Secondly, we looked at other countries and what they had done in trying to address this problem. And one of the major countries we looked at was Rwanda, where their governmental policies have really helped them to reduce the amount of plastic circulating in the economy. We also looked at Zimbabwe, and what we realized was that if we do not use something that allows us to study what is existing and build on that, we may not be able to show the problem in depth.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. And I thought the way in which you had alighted upon the informal waste collection, plastic collection, was very good. But how is that now taken ahead, in the sense that I think you were talking about the price paid and regulation? Is it straightforward to get governments to do your government to do these things?
Thank you very much. I would take the question, but Denver would also add on when I'm done. So we think there's no straightforward way to get to the government. However, we are looking at using the bottom-up approach. Prior to this project, we had done a little bit of research and worked with different people in various communities because we love the problem we are working on, and we've been working on it for about 3 years, trying to study, trying to create connections with various people in communities. And so one of the main things we worked on and are planning to continue working on is creating a network and a business model that manages the interactions of these informal plastic waste collectors and connects them with waste collecting larger waste collecting companies, recycling companies. And another way we plan to go about this is to influence change within institutions such as schools, primary schools, secondary schools, and even at our very own university where we already segregate our waste. And as we said earlier in the presentation, that is one of the problems we've realized that exist in the solutions offered by waste collecting companies. And so I'll hand over to Denver to talk about how we intend to engage smaller communities in Accra.
During our research, we found out that these small-scale waste pickers, there are people on the ground who know like what's happening. There are people who reach areas the government can't reach. For example, in the marketplace, you can see them picking plastics under a vendor's table. So they are very important stakeholders within the whole system. But it's not that easy to bridge the gap between those small-scale plastic waste pickers and the government. So that's why we need to use systems thinking approach to find the perfect intervention plan so that we can we can give them the voice to the government. For example, encouraging the government to set up the correct documentation and correct prices which can encourage them to work. That would give them the required attention and would make them recognizable in the whole system. And if we manage to make the whole network connect them at local level, state level, then
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, I think we lost Denver a bit, but I'll just finish up on that question.
Sorry, Nadine, I'm sorry to interrupt. We've just gone over time. We're going to have to, unfortunately, end the Q&A there. But well done. Thank you so much, Team Ashesi. Everyone give a big round of applause. You may not be able to hear it, team, but feel it from all around the world. Well done, and we'll move on now to our second team. It's remarkable, as you're listening to these presentations, keep in mind that these teams were doing this work, dozens of interviews and surveys and other research work, oftentimes in the context of a lockdown. So it's really quite extraordinary. Let's welcome our second team here from the University of Chicago, near my hometown. We have Anne and Sarah, who make up the U of C team, and they'll be talking with us today about adolescent pregnancy in Peru. Welcome.
To begin, we want to introduce you to our friend Gloria, who lives at a home for teenage mothers in Cusco, where I worked last year. Gloria is just one of over 212,000 girls in Peru today who are pregnant.
No es fácil ser madre. No solo es ser una niña que tenga un hijo menor de edad. Mi sueño es ser algo en la vida, por ejemplo, ser una profesora, una guía, o una bailarina.
Just by virtue of where she was born, Gloria was 6 times more likely to become a mother as an adolescent than the global average. All across the globe, teenage pregnancy has fallen by about 1.5% since 2011. But in Peru, it's climbing, and it is climbing twice as fast in rural areas as in the rest of the country. Peru has prioritized other public health and economic issues, but not taking this matter seriously affects overall Peruvian society. This is Maria with her daughter Flora, and here are some challenges teenage mothers like her face that limit their full participation in the development of their home country. All these challenges make Maria's daughter 51% more likely to become a teenage mother herself. For us, this issue is deeply personal. My name is Annie Custer.
And my name is Sarah Serrani. And together we've spent nearly 30 months in Peru and also talked to over 130 stakeholders, including 80 for adolescents, to help put a face to this problem. The 5 key levels we are focusing on are socioeconomics, sexual education, political will, healthcare access, and cultural norms. It is critical to understand this problem under a cultural lens. Peruvian society operates under machista, or chauvinistic cultural norms that perpetuate unequal power dynamics and normalize violent or unhealthy sexual behaviors. As a consequence, discussing sex and reproductive health is taboo in Peruvian society, resulting in serious pushback against government attempts to mandate comprehensive sex education or accessible contraception. Just last year, the Ministry of Health only spent 42% of their budget, which is only 4 soles per person, which is less than £1 on preventing adolescent pregnancy.
The Peruvian government's limited financial and political commitment similarly limits Peruvian teenagers' education and healthcare access. Only 9% of youth in Peru actually receive comprehensive sex education in school. Otherwise, it is informal, if it exists at all, and is based on misconceptions.
Further, and particularly in rural areas, access to reproductive health care is stymied by geographical constraints, legal misunderstandings, privacy concerns, and clinic hours limited to when you're. Finally, girls are 150% more likely to get pregnant if they're on a lower quintile for poverty, which accounts for girls in most rural areas.
Currently, as indicated by the dashed lines here, there are a lot of stakeholders partially involved in solving this, and not very many who are offering complete solutions.
The Peruvian government itself has largely focused on healthcare access and education as critical pathways to the reduction of teenage pregnancy. But the implementation of these programs has been limited by the national government's inability to adapt programming to distinct languages and cultures in different regions.
The inefficiencies in the system reinforce one another. None of the 5 key factors we've spoken about exist without influence from the others. In particular, machista power dynamics fit at the center of these feedback loops, influencing not only the most interpersonal relationship dynamics, but also national issues of political will and accountability.
We want to focus on preventative levers of change to address these existing gaps. We want to think about supporting young girls now and to not have to enter this cycle at all.
We're focusing on comprehensive sex education and storytelling methodology to empower girls to have agency over their choices and their bodies, and specifically to reach girls from lower socioeconomic statuses who may not have access to healthcare.
We propose improving communication and resources across regional stakeholders to allocate more government funding to the local level to increase political will.
Importantly, we need to intentionally involve the community, including men and boys, to adapt to these cultural norms.
And the best way to do this would be to implement solutions across all 5 levers of change. But by even considering 1 or 2 of the solutions you see here, we can slow these feedback loops and help alleviate pressure from the system.
This is Maria's story. Again, this emphasizes how the current system is failing not just her, but also her daughter.
But through our proposed solutions, this can be her daughters. Together, we're working to end the cycle of teenage pregnancy and support girls like Flora and others. Thank you.
Big round of applause, team. Thank you. I really loved some of your phrases there around putting a face to the problem and showing us how the system reinforces itself, which I think is a very good thing to think about. When we look at your levers of change, what collaborations do you think did you see would be necessary to kind of help them to happen?
I can jump here, and Sarah, you can add on. I'm sure you'll have a unique perspective as well. We were really focused on sort of drawing lines between members of the communities that were already doing this kinds of work. So we're really focused on looking at the communities themselves and who's already involved. So trying to bring in midwives, for example, into the sex education sphere, trying to work with communities and local NGOs that are already doing some of this masculinity work and bringing them into the education metrics as well, looking at women who are involved in microfinance and bringing them into supporting community health workers who might be able to provide some of these reproductive health and contraception to the local communities. So we really wanted to focus on creating collaboration between people who are already involved and how we could best sort of support that.
And we especially want to work across sectors and across fields and across levels as well. Because like, as we see here, adolescent pregnancy is not just a symptom of access to healthcare. It's also a factor of like a lack of empowerment, like, reduced socioeconomic agency, like problems in education, the fact that only 13% of teen moms actually continue their secondary education. So the biggest thing is actually seeing what people are doing on the ground and kind of bringing them together through conversation, dialogue, and collaboration.
Thank you so much, Anne and Sarah. It sounds like you're really invested in this community that you worked with, that you serve, that you collaborated. So can you share a little bit about what this work might look like going forward?
Absolutely. We are really excited about taking this work forward. I think as for many of our fellow teams here, Map the System was sort of a step to carry this forward and definitely not the end goal for us. We're very excited about implementing, in particular, some of these community collaborations that we've talked about. Sarah and I have both worked on storytelling and empowerment methodology. I've worked in the Andes, you can see from my background potentially, and Sarah has focused more in the Amazon region. So we're really looking forward to potentially starting pilot programs in these specific communities, really focusing in on monitoring and evaluation and revising to be really adaptive to the cultural context moving forward. We're hoping to start with an organization that we call Nayarak, which in the indigenous language of Quechua means one with many dreams, and is inspired by these communities and by these girls that we do love dearly, and we've spent quite some time focusing in on.
And one important thing just to add on is that like it's not just two of us working on this. Like our ideas are like a like Mod Podge and a collaboration of like all the people we talk to across different regions, members in the government and grassroots NGOs, including like more than 80 adolescents we've spoken to. So it's not just like our ideas moving forward. We're just bringing together all these people we've talked to and working towards this common goal that everyone is dreaming of.
Thank you very much, Anne and Sarah. Beautiful backgrounds, by the way. Really appreciate your time. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Feel the applause. It's coming from all around the world. Let's move on to our third team. We are actually staying in Illinois, not too far from this last team. So from the University of Illinois, we have Angela, Jiho, and Ajaita, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. We're going to be hearing from this phenomenal team on the topic of how is women's health affected by menstruation in the United States. Team U of I, welcome.
When I got my first period, I thought I was dying. Clearly, the Changing Bodies workshop at school did not prepare me for this, but it did teach me to never talk about periods in public. For years, I ignored my period problems, and it took the extreme of me bleeding for 4 weeks straight to receive care for anemia and hormonal imbalance.
This silence about menstruation reinforces stigma and contributes to menstrual inequity, a systemic issue that includes period poverty or lack of access to period products, as well as broader issues related to social services, policy, economic opportunity, and gender identity. We will explore how U.S. institutions perpetuate stigma and oppressive sexist structures, the root causes that exacerbate menstrual inequity.
The challenge landscape demonstrates how menstrual inequity is embedded across diverse institutions and reinforced by patterns of behavior, system structures, and mental models. Learning about menstruation should come from sex education, but schools have limited curriculum and most students fill their knowledge gaps through corporate advertising. These companies maximize profit by reinforcing stigma, which facilitates societal apathy. Apathy normalizes period symptoms and prevents research on menstruation. The lack of research causes government indifference towards menstrual education in schools, upholding discriminatory practices across institutions.
Inaccess stems from the government's failure to provide product and hygiene resources. Heavily influenced by corporations who monopolize an enormous market, the FDA barely regulates menstrual products. Inaccess hurts low-income populations the most, especially since it's more difficult to obtain menstrual hygiene resources. Furthermore, nonprofits are limited in distribution reach, but still fill in gaps the government should be supporting. Millions suffer because legislators fail to see menstrual health as a basic need.
The present system exemplifies how menstrual inequity is closely tied to tangential systems like gender inequality, prison reform, and mental health. Many inmates are from low-income backgrounds and have experienced period poverty. Most have a history of being abused. This continues with correctional officers coercing inmates into sex or begging in exchange for menstrual products. These inhumane acts go unreported without laws to protect the incarcerated. Systems of power hurt prisoners' mental health. Coral Martin was a California inmate with psychosis. She was forced into isolation to sit in her own blood without any clothes or medication. She recalls being treated like an animal.
These patterns of abuse exist across institutions. Menstruators' silence is reinforced by people in power, and structures reflect this with systemic discrimination in schools, prisons, and the workforce. The system has been broken since the beginning of Western culture and remains so partly due to generational shame discourse.
We will define two gaps and share actionable levers for each. Lack of standardization is the failure to provide equitable access to menstrual health products, hygiene, and education across the country. Title IX policies enforce gender equality in education, but there aren't any federal laws setting standards to address menstrual equity. Because menstruation causes unequal barriers to education access, Title IX policies could also be leveraged to support menstrual equity. This will set a precedent for proper access to menstrual care in schools.
The coronavirus spending package enables people to purchase period products with health savings accounts, but lower-paying jobs don't offer these benefits. Lawmakers can expand this bill to allow people on welfare to buy period products using electronic benefit transfers like food stamps.
Lack of agency in environment is caused by those in power failing to acknowledge stigma, thereby limiting an individual's mobility and independence. Schools and shelters with restrictive schedules for bathroom, shower, and laundry access should be more flexible to help menstruators take care of themselves with privacy. Providing unrestricted soap and water can reduce the risks of infection and prevent shame-inducing situations, as menstruators can freely wash period stains from their clothes.
Reducing interactions with authority figures will increase accessibility. By dispensing free products in all bathrooms, students avoid the shame that comes with asking nurses or custodians. Providing reusable period underwear can save prisons money long term. It can eliminate abusive dynamics in which wardens intentionally induce inmates' anxiety by withholding products.
Systems thinking made us dive beyond the surface, deepening our empathy for those affected by menstrual inequity, including genderqueer and intersex menstruators, as well as vulnerable populations like those who are homeless. By iterating with systems tools, we've learned the solution is more than providing products. 3,000 years of shame and oppressive structures can't be reversed with more pads. Holistic frameworks of access include products, hygiene, and education. To make lasting systemic change, we can start by normalizing menstruation in everyday conversations. We can educate ourselves on how stigma and institutional discrimination affects period policies and mindsets. We can make meaningful progress when we understand the system. Thank you.
Fantastic, really nicely done. Let's move straight into the 5-minute Q&A period with our judges.
Yeah, really wonderfully done. Really appreciating you using various systems tool. I'm curious, as you step back and looking at the project, how did the various systems tool help you gain the insight that you would otherwise not have? And how did that impact you as an individual?
Yeah, definitely. I think systems thinking helped us kind of approach this from a holistic framework. We saw a lot of these patterns across institutions after researching tons of stakeholders and taking an approach from a human-centered design lens. But when we stepped back, we really got to piece together all of those patterns. And I think in doing so, it also helped us identify all of the tangential systems that are really related to menstrual inequity. And I think that was something that was really transformative for our project because we just saw how entrenched this is within other systems as well. And even thinking about some of the examples that we had, including prison reform, how that relates to the current movement of Black Lives Matter, and how that's related to the fact that a majority of people that are put in state and local prisons are of BIPOC communities, and how they specifically deal with more period poverty than other groups. I think getting that perspective of how closely tied this is to so many other systems was really shocking, but also really motivational in helping us understand that dismantling one can lead to dismantling another system as well. And I can pass it on to Angela to add a little bit more.
Yeah, and something that's been happening to all of us is as we're dealing with COVID-19, many menstruators we've seen around the world are really struggling for period product access. And in the United States, we've underestimated or overestimated the capabilities of our healthcare system. And so we're seeing many BIPOC being affected by this. Many of them, the normalization of pain, as we've talked about, has really shown through with BIPOC, as many of them aren't taken seriously when they go to the doctors. And another thing is that healthcare workers, women and other people who menstruate, who need PPE, are really struggling. My mother is a healthcare worker, and navigating your period during times like these have been really hard.
Thank you. I've got the pleasure of asking you the second question. You've done a tremendous amount of research, and we saw in the final part of your presentation that list of people that you actually went out and interviewed. From all of that research, was there anything that you found really surprising?
I can take this one. And then Jiho, you can add on. I think for me, we interviewed an activist named Kiran Gandhi. She actually didn't start off as a menstrual activist. She decided to run the London Marathon in 2015 and she got her period the day before. But she realized she didn't want to wear a tampon or a period product for 26.2 miles while running. So she decided not to, and she free bled the marathon. And it became such a huge movement online. I think one of the surprising things that we got from her interview and from a lot of interviews is that participating in actions that make us comfortable as menstruators usually lead to people believing that they are these radical activists that are trying to transform the system. When in reality, all they're really trying to do is live their life as comfortably as possible and normalize menstruation. So I think that was something that was really interesting to see. Jiho, if you'd like to add to that.
So one of the biggest shocking things that I learned about was through my interview with the ACLU deputy director. ACLU is the American Civil Union Liberty ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union deputy director, and she was telling us about how menstrual inequity affects prisoners so badly. There are prisoners who are forced into isolation, free bleeding without any clothes on, without any products, are forced into these unhygienic environments and are forced to endure these very undignifying and very harsh environments for these terrible conditions. And this isn't a rare case. When I first heard about it, I was like, oh, it must be this one individual. But really, it's a huge systemic issue, especially in prisons, with many prisoners being forced to beg or to be sexually coerced into rape for exchange for these products, as well as just the power differentials between correctional officers and prisoners is just something that really hit me personally. And I know within my teammates, it really hit us personally because when we first started this project, we were like, menstrual inequity, how big can this problem be in the United States? We had such a naive mindset with that. And it really brought us back to how privileged we are. And even though we ourselves as menstruators struggle, there are so many other vulnerable populations who are struggling even more in our country.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, team from University of Illinois. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are halfway through our presentations. That is, we're through 3 teams. We're going to take a very short break right now, just for everyone to kind of stretch their legs, have a comfort break if they need to, or to grab a beverage. Let's just take about 2 minutes. So it's 4 minutes past the hour now. We'll come back at 6 minutes past the hour to introduce our next team all of you, I want to encourage you to at least get up out of your chair, whether you're on video or not. If you don't have anything else you need to do, just stand up and get the blood flowing. I'm going to do it to lead by example. Do some star jumps, do some air squats, do some sun salutations, walk around a little bit. We all sit in front of the computer a little bit too much. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a wonderful break, had a stretch, had a cup of tea. So much more to come. One of the really fun things about this event is that the projects are just so diverse, the topics, the folks presenting, and I always just learn so much. It's an amazing sort of tour of things happening around the world. So let's continue on now. We're moving on to our fourth finalist team from the University of North Carolina. We have Megan, Paige, Shelley, Kristen, and Sarah from UNC, and they'll be speaking to us about using system science to advance health equity in tobacco control. Welcome, Team UNC.
Tobacco use is the leading cause of preventable death in the U.S. Millions of Americans smoke or use tobacco products and are exposed to secondhand smoke, which leads to billions of dollars in health spending every year. Since 1965, nationwide smoking prevalence has declined by 50%. However, this progress is not evenly distributed, and disparities still exist for racial and ethnic minorities and low socioeconomic populations. Using the iceberg model, we examine smoking inequities while considering underlying structures and mental models. We determined that an imbalance of resources and power, as well as discrimination and marginalization, contribute to these disparities. Additionally, there are two mental models that drive tobacco control, which we'll outline on the next slide. These two conventional approaches are high-risk approaches, which focus on changing individual behavior of those at highest risk through targeted education or counseling, and population approaches that aim to change smoking norms by altering the environment through policy change. Rooted in these approaches, we created a conventional map of smoking that includes individual factors in green and environmental factors in blue. A plus sign indicates that variables move in the same direction, and a minus sign indicates they move in opposite directions. For example, while stress increases the likelihood of smoking, access to cessation services decreases it. However, conventional interventions may unintentionally amplify benefits for certain groups while minimizing them for others, which can sustain or widen disparities. In order to eliminate them, a priority population approach that centers on equity and addresses underlying structures from our iceberg model is necessary. We created an updated systems map that incorporates root causes of smoking or disparity factors in red. This new map can demonstrate, for example, how low-wage work is related to insurance coverage, which precedes access to cessation services. Other factors we identified include marginalization, discrimination, and social capital, which may not be considered when using conventional approaches.
We used our updated systems map as well as an impact gaps canvas to evaluate the potential of tobacco control policies to reduce disparities in smoking. One example we considered is smoke-free public housing. In this case, the challenge was that 15% of US adults, but 1/3 of public housing residents smoke. To address this issue, in 2018, all US public housing units were required to go smoke-free. This had some success, with residents self-reporting higher quit rates, but half of residents violated the policy. Thus, the root causes of higher smoking among public housing residents, such as housing instability and related stress, remain unaddressed. Our updated map visualizes the intended mechanisms of change for addressing smoking disparities and the unintended impacts of smoke-free public housing. Starting with the mechanisms of change on the left, the policy is expected to reduce the number of homes that permit smoking, which then lowers tobacco use among family and friends. This reduces the normalization of smoking and perceptions of tobacco use as low risk, and these processes are reinforcing. However, the right side of the slide shows that housing instability is increased when residents violate this policy. This increases financial strain and stress and reduces feelings of control. So this policy has the unintended consequence of increasing smoking and leaving low-income residents at further risk of housing instability. The traditional stakeholders involved in tobacco control efforts include the government, health systems, tobacco control advocacy groups, and academic researchers. Given the unintended effects of the policies that we assessed, we used our map to understand whose perspectives are still needed to address the root causes of smoking. Examples include mental health practitioners who can assist with stress management, and importantly, smokers themselves who have not traditionally been engaged. To gather feedback on our model, we conducted semi-structured interviews with 7 traditional and non-traditional stakeholders. Overall, the interviewees validated the constructs included in our model and provided insight into new relationships that we had not previously included. By applying both a system science approach as well as a health equity lens to our problem, we found that disproportionately high smoking rates in priority populations are a product of traditional smoking risk factors, as well as unequal power and resources. Our updated conceptual model revealed that even policies designed to promote equity and tobacco control can have unintended consequences. The perspectives of a broader range of stakeholders are needed to ensure equitable outcomes. Finally, we learned it is important to use an iterative process for refining systems maps to identify new relationships between variables, as well as other stakeholders to bring to the table. Thank you.
Hi, team. Thank you very much for that. I was interested, you've drawn the boundary as deaths from smoking. But if you look at some of the work, you find that if people stop smoking, then they move on to another drug of solace, which is eating fatty and sugar foods, and that leads to obesity, and they may well get morbidity and mortality from that. And I wondered if you'd considered in your work the wider boundary of deaths in total.
That's a great question. So I think, and food access and food security and food choices were actually brought up by one of our stakeholders that we asked for feedback from. And we originally hadn't thought of that, which I think kind of reiterates the fact that you need to get feedback from different folks that are working on this problem on the ground. And so I think that it also is evidence that those types of stakeholders that understand issues around quitting smoking and how that how diet relates to that is really important to understand that there needs to be support in that area if folks are quitting. So I think, for example, for the public housing policy, the policy would need to be put in place plus the support that's required, maybe something related to diet and exercise, or food security or food access, things like that.
Yeah, and I can add to that as well. I think also in our map, we found that a lot of these loops are affected by stress and sense of control. And in particular, in some of the policies we evaluated, those were the common ones that came up that would lead to some of these unintended effects. And so I think, too, we've talked a lot about looping in mental health practitioners and those who can help to identify other healthier options when trying to quit smoking, and thinking about larger other lifestyle changes that would just be healthier options.
Joe?
Great, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate very much how you identify the various unintended consequences and you map it out and showing quite explicitly. What I'm curious, how do you discover those unintended consequences? What's the process? Did you do it through your research, through various tools, and that you discover that? And share a little bit about that so we can learn, how do you wear that lens in looking for those unintended consequences?
Thank you. So our primary method initially for considering unintended consequences was we had initially identified a few different policies that we wanted to evaluate within this area. And so we had selected those policies that are considered pro-equity, as well as those that have shown some political promise. And so each of the policies that we had considered have been implemented in certain areas. So for instance, smoke-free public housing has been implemented. Minimum price laws we considered have been implemented in some cities in the US. And so we were able to identify, kind of consider them, what's happened to date with those particular policies, and then see what are the ripple effects related to other factors.
I think also pertaining to our methodology, we really tried to incorporate information from multiple sources. So not just the academic literature, but gathering feedback from folks that are working directly with affected populations and really trying to iterate and triangulate all of those multiple sources of information, because we don't have all the answers, just the four of us. So really trying to get a holistic picture that's cross-sector and reflective of what's happening in the real world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, team. Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And now we are on to our fifth finalist team, now from University of Rochester. We have Nitin, Krishna, Siki, and Yu Zhao, who are going to be presenting on the opioid epidemic in the United States. Welcome, team.
Hi, our team is from the University of Rochester Simon Business School, and our topic for Map the System Contest 2020 is Fatal Opioid Crisis of the United States. In the next few minutes, we'll walk you through the challenge landscape, current solutions, gaps and levers of change that we identified, and conclude with our learnings. Opioid addiction. It is characterized by a powerful and compulsive urge to use opioid drugs even when they are no longer required medically. An estimate of over 10.3 million Americans reported non-medical use of opioids. Every 15 minutes, a child is born suffering from withdrawal. From 2015 to 2018, opioid crisis has caused an economic burden of $2.5 trillion on U.S. healthcare system. In 2017, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services declared opioid epidemic as a public health emergency. To truly solve this problem, which is affecting the United States and many countries around the world, we try to understand the way the system works to create and sustain the problem. We believe that to holistically address the problem, harm reduction strategies and treatment approaches should go hand in hand. The exposed tip of the iceberg is the opioid crisis and the public health emergency. However, let's dive deeper to understand the root causes today. 28 people die every day from opioid overdose in the United States. It all started with greedy pharmaceutical companies understating the addictive potential of drugs. Physicians and insurers played a significant role in worsening the problem. And today, profitable drug trafficking and efficient supply chains has increased the availability of illicit drugs in the United States. The root causes lie in the established mental models. People's perception of pain relief. People now want instant pain relief, which is and still continues to force providers and pharmacies to dole out opioids. Our analysis uncovers many significant inequalities between the physical and mental health, disparities in access to benefits, and many more, systemically contributing to the problem. We have used the causal loop model to understand the intricacies and dependencies of the crisis. As our visual map covers the entire system dynamics of opioid crisis, here we would like to bring your attention to the medical use loop. After decades of opioid deaths, the system realized that opioids have a high potential for causing addiction in people, even when the medications are prescribed appropriately and taken as directed. This has influenced the perceived risk and risk-adjusted treatment rate. This has reduced the number of opioid prescription and in turn the number of deaths in the last decade. Initiatives taken by government and federal agencies, hospitals, pharma companies to change the prescribing and dispensing practices and build community partnerships have been successful in reducing the demand and supply for prescription opioids, prevent diversion, and reduce stigma. Gaps, however, remain due to lack of coordination. The complexity of opioid crisis requires all components to come together and make changes in coordination at the same time. Identifying the levers of change under cure and prevention categories has been an important part of our research and analysis. We would like important points. Holistic alternative pain management solutions such as acupuncture and hypnosis have been proved to be effective. Insurers need to reimburse for these solutions. At education level, we need to change the perception of pain, educate general public and patients about the downsides of opioids, and bring awareness about the alternative holistic pain management programs. During our research, we learned some shocking paradox around opioid crisis. The government, instead of taxing opioids like other harmful goods, subsidized it. Addicts can relapse into addiction anytime after staying clean for many years. Abuse-deterrent opioids and stringent laws which were in place to curb the problem, in few cases, contributed to worsening it. By adopting systems thinking, our biggest learning is that to truly solve a public health problem, changing just one part of the system can have incomplete or even adverse effects on overall outcomes. A system thinking approach, the opioid epidemic, involved understanding that a combination of factors, various components, and structures of the system is warranted to curb the problem and reverse the trends. We also like to acknowledge that it's not currently possible to prevent or treat all cases. There's a need to change the perception that drug misuse and addiction are individual moral failings. We need a broad social, economic, and environmental factors. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Question for you. You talked about some of the lessons learned, and I really appreciated that part of the presentation in particular. I'm curious about the assumptions that you might have gone into this project with that you found shifted for you as you learned more about the system.
I can take that one. So while working through this project, we came across a lot of paradoxical learnings, and I would try and sum up a few of those for you. So we started with the learning that opioid addiction is not a delinquent behavior. So when you see a person dying on overdosing on opioids, you think that the person might be a junkie. He might have taken up the street drug. but our research suggests that 80% of people who overdose on opioids, they start with prescription medications. The medicines that have been prescribed by the doctors as safe led them to these addictions. That was one of the first learnings. Secondly, we also realized that the federal government ended up being an unintended partner in this overall crisis. Now, whenever there's a harm good such as tobacco, the federal government taxes that good heavily. Instead, federal government subsidized opioids extensively. Now, this did not only have a pricing impact on opioids, it also created a perception that opioids are safe to use. In a way, the government endorsed the opinion that opioids are safe to use when they were not safe for use. Finally, I think my teammate Krishna Maitli can take up a couple of more learnings.
Yeah. So another biggest learning for us have been about abuse deterrent opioids. So these were in place to actually reduce misuse and abuse of prescription opioids so that people cannot crush them or smoke or inject them for non-medical uses. However, that has led to the increase of illicit drugs because the prescription drugs are no longer available for addiction. So this has been another shocking thing for us to realize. And also the laws in place that the stringent laws have also contributed to increasing the opioid crisis because at the end of the day, people were hesitant to say, for example, a friend was critical of opioid overdose. People didn't want to commit or tell police or public safety about it because they were themselves scared of persecution or being behind the bars. So these were some of the things that we learned, which was shocking for us because this was something that we didn't see when it was looking at it from the superficial levels, and the system thinking helped us dive deeper there.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I am really curious about your research process to kind of understand this issue in the depth that you have. How did you go about researching this? And in particular, how did you approach research ethics?
Sure. So we started with an inference map where we listed down all the stakeholders in the supply chain, starting from the pharmaceutical companies that from where the drugs were originating, the manufacturers, right to the end consumers of these drugs. Now, during this research, we were able to figure out the multidimensional aspect of the problem. When we noted down all the participants in the problem, as part of inference diagram, there were some obvious participants. For instance, the drug manufacturers, the pharmaceutical companies, the medical practitioners. However, when we expanded further on this research and started asking ourselves that what is happening, why is it happening, we came upon certain actors that were not intended to be part of the supply chain, such as the government and the advocacy groups that came up. So, for instance, just to quote an example, there were a lot of advocacy groups that promoted the perception that pain should be a fifth essential vital in terms of medical calculation. Now, this was really strange for us because pain is something that cannot be objectively measured like your pulse rate or your heart rate or your blood pressure. But still, whenever a new patient is admitted, because of these advocacy groups, the medical practitioners are required to ask that patient that how do you rate your pain on a scale of 10? And if the patient says the scale is high, which is subjective in itself, the medical practitioner is supposed to prescribe opioids. So the primary tool was an inference map where we noted down all the participants and started questioning why is whatever is happening, why is it happening?
To add to that, we also heavily depended on both primary and secondary research. We had interviewees from across the ecosystem, right from the patients, medical practitioners, insurers, people working in nonprofits, everywhere to understand from their part. And as Nathan mentioned, there were a couple of people like insurers we haven't even thought of who are actually contributing to this problem by actually not reimbursing behavioral therapies or alternative pain therapies for pain relief. So these going. Oh, okay.
Sorry, we're at time. So just to be fair to all the teams, we're going to have to be strict about it. Thank you so much, team. Really nicely done. Bravo. And last but not least, our sixth finalist team today is coming from right here at the University of Oxford. We have some people who are probably tired of seeing me. We have Shola, Freya, Snigdha, Kaya, and Matalena, and they'll be talking with us about violence, women, and modern slavery in Papua. Welcome, team.
We acknowledge that we are speaking from the unceded and sovereign lands of First Nations people in Australia. We also acknowledge West Papuan sovereignty. In 2013, Kaparia Leniata was publicly stripped naked, tortured, doused in petrol and burnt alive. Accused of witchcraft, Leniata's story is where our journey begins and research starts. Her violent death made world headlines, but is not an isolated incident in New Guinea and West Papua. Kaparia's story represents one story of the 70% of women throughout the region who are raped or physically assaulted in their lifetime. The severity and this violence has been a war zone, is often deficit space of a deeper stress. The complex nexus between the brutality of colonization and exploitation, which works to produce a set of social conditions of women. Where nearly more than 1,000 cases the tip of the understood the need to unpack this deeper, and to do so we used Indigenous knowledge as subjective methodologies.
We shaped our systems map around our system.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I think we're gonna restart the video so that it plays properly. The AV team's just downloading it and checking the connection. So we're gonna have to pause and we'll get it back up and running in just a couple seconds. Hang tight.
We acknowledge that we are speaking from the unceded and sovereign lands of First Nations people in Australia. We also acknowledge West Papuan sovereignty. In 2013, Kaparia Leniata was publicly stripped naked, tortured, doused in petrol and burnt alive. Accused of witchcraft, Leniata's story is where our journey begins and research starts. Her violent death made world headlines, but is not an isolated incident in New Guinea and West Papua. Kaparia's story represents one story of the 70% of women throughout the region who are raped or physically assaulted in their lifetime. The severity and pervasiveness of gender-based violence has been described a pandemic, like a war zone. However, this particular narrative is often deficit-based and problematizes non-Westernized cultures. It is our contention then that the nature of violence in this region forms part of a deeper structure of modern slavery. Therefore, our definition of modern slavery has been this: the complex nexus between the brutality of colonization and exploitation, which works to produce a set of social conditions that systematically perpetuate the bondage of women. This is illustrated in the statistics that are known about violence in the region, where nearly more than 1,000 witch hunts take place each year. However, this is the tip of the iceberg. From this, we understood the need to unpack this deeper, and to do so, we used Indigenous knowledge as theory. This is a theory which draws upon ideas that knowledge is not neutral, but instead subjective and based on unequal structures of power.
In keeping with our decolonizing methodology, we use systems mapping to understand the institutional structures and cultural norms that impact women in Papua New Guinea. We did this to understand the complexity of the system and the interests that hold it in place. We shaped our systems map around the key mental models we identified in our iceberg map. Our systems map is built around the deep structure from the iceberg map to illustrate cycles of violence and exploitation faced by women. To understand the critical points in this challenge landscape, we centered our analysis on the ways in which modernization has distorted and disconnected Papua New Guinea from traditional values. Firstly, we looked at how customs were monetized and how women became exchangeable commodities for use in the money economy. One of the consequences of this is a decrease in the inherent value of women and a devaluing of women's education. Lower education rates lead to a lack of formal employment opportunities for women and cause women to rely on informal marketplace incomes. These marketplace incomes are vulnerable to seasonal fluctuations, which further compound the vulnerability of women's livelihoods. Finally, this distortion of traditional ways of life results in culturally specific forms of violence, including sorcery and witch hunts, like in Kapari Leniada's story.
Of the many gaps and levers we identified, the disconnection between policies and local cultures stood out as a key hindrance in the solutions landscape. The New Guinea region is by far the most culturally dense region in the world, with 817 different languages and 312 different tribes. Therefore, prescriptive and often blanket solutions typically overlook the social and cultural nuances that feed into the varying occurrences of female exploitation in the region, and deep social structures such as the Wontok system typically hold more authority than formal legislation. An effective lever of change will involve conducting a deep mapping exercise of social norms between cultures and designing programs accordingly with the local people. Another pivotal gap was identified through the observing of dynamics of stakeholders in the solutions landscape and how the lack of synergies was diminishing efforts. On one hand, large organizations lack social capital and understanding to deliver meaningful programs, while the grassroots organizations lack longevity and sustainability. This highlighted the potential lever of change that could be achieved through mapping the system of power dynamics and impact in the total stakeholder ecosystem. To help us further understand the nature of these power dynamics, we created the stakeholder map that privileged Papua New Guinea women, placing them at the center of the analysis. The resulting map displayed a clear trend where systemic power flows away from the women in the center of the structure towards governing bodies on the outside. Through the mapping exercises, we were able to see that the violence and exploitation of women in Papua New Guinea is the driving force of a central system and helps to maintain the systems of commercial, societal, cultural, and political slavery of women in the region. To assert these notions, we strive to engage and champion the voices of PNG people closest to the issue. In the process, we were privileged to engage with some truly powerful and awe-inspiring women fighting for justice for all women in PNG. People like Cressida Koala, currently in exile in PNG, due to her 10-year ongoing battle to realise justice for the nearly 200 women in her village of Pagera that were raped or tortured under the watch of one of the largest mining corporations in the world. Or Sister Daisy Lysiana, who independently started women-led support groups in her village for the women too scared to report abuse to local authorities. It is therefore our hope to gain much more than a learning experience, but to deliver a systems analysis and tool that might be used by the Papua New Guinea community to help articulate self-determined and sovereign solutions towards their continued fight for freedom and justice.
Hello, we are African Transformers and we are...
Thank you, team. I'm seeing rounds of applause. I really appreciate the work that you did to be in right relationship with the land, with the methodology, and with the people with whom you worked. So I'm curious how your work has been received by those who contributed to it, and also what you hope your relationship with them might look like going forward.
Hi, thanks so much for your question. Yeah, so I guess the way that we kind of structured our research process was we did start by doing kind of like secondary research to try to get our head around the kind of the whole issue and the existing body of research that was out there that kind of like helped to describe it, because it was so complex and there were so many moving parts of it. We really tried to contextualize it on our own. And then the second phase of it that we went into was really trying to take it to key stakeholders in the community and essentially saying, well, you know, this is a thing called system mapping that that we're going through, and this is the map that we've come up with. Can you please contextualize it and tell us, tell us what's wrong with it and tell us, what can be improved by it? I think that the response that came from it was that the people that we engaged with were very optimistic at how useful of a tool that it could be. And they were really appreciative of the fact of how we were trying to bring it from a position that kind of privileged their knowledge and privileged their understanding of how the world works, rather than us just trying to superimpose, and our understanding of things, which is where a lot of the current research is coming from. So how we kind of went through that process is bringing them the research that we had and essentially asking if they would come with us on the journey afterwards to be able to further conceptualization and be able to take it forward, which I feel like they're really excited about, I guess, well and beyond the competition. So I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
I'll ask a further question then. an amazing presentation, and it's emphasizes the importance of the approach and methodology that you selected, and it sounds like a really iterative approach to your research as well. Can you say more about how you selected the methodology that you used, and why you see a difference in the outcomes that you do as opposed to if you had used a more traditional approach?
Hi, I'm Kaya, and I guess I'll start by saying we had been very kind of intentional about embedding from the very beginning of this process a declaration on where we stood and where our positions were as outsiders coming to this knowledge. We made it very clear that everything that we would look at in this process would be different because of our proximity to the region. The fact that we, whilst three of us are of Pacific Islander descent, we understood that we were still outsiders looking in. And based off our own kind of experiences within our own communities, one of the biggest issues we wanted to respond to was that very issue of people superimposing their own ideas. So every step of the process had to intentionally embed that practice and line of inquiry from concept to completion. And it is that ethic that has guided the protocols in which we analyse and both interpret the data. Does anyone else want to sort of add to that, Shola, maybe? No, that's okay. Did you have another question?
I think we're at time. So thank you so much, Team University of Oxford. Very well done. And that completes our round of presentations from our 6 finalists. It's worth just taking a moment to kind of acknowledge the depth and the richness of the maps and all the explorations that have surrounded them with all of these projects. And it's someone who spends a lot of time working with groups on projects like this. It's incredibly difficult to try to condense it into 5 minutes. And I think you all did a really nice job of distilling some of the key insights. And I'm sure it felt like you could have used an hour to just scratch the surface of what you learned, but really, really nicely done. So we have reached that moment in our event when we turn to deliberation. And so we're going to excuse our judges along with Anna to go and begin their deliberation process in a private Zoom room. And judges, you should all have that information to drop off there. Let's aim to be back by 10 past the hour so that we can get to the most exciting part of the event. And then for those of you in the audience, it's going to be time for you to vote as well. So today we're going to be awarding £10,000 worth of prizes to these teams today. The first, second, and third place teams will be receiving prizes of £4,000, £3,000, and £2,000 respectively. And then we also have an audience award elected by all of you out there today for a £1,000 prize. And so shortly, I believe on the screen, we should have a slide up that will give you a Slido link where you can vote. So you should see that on the screen now. So what you want to do is go to slido.com. That's SLIDO.com. If you haven't used this before, and then I believe you need to enter hashtag MTS for Map This System 2020. And there you should see a pretty clear option to vote for one of the 6 groups. So we're going to take a few minutes to give you a chance to vote, as well as stretch your legs if you need to, or take a comfort break. And we'll be back in about 2 or 3 more minutes to introduce Dr. Wheatley, our keynote speaker. If you have any problems voting, write something in the chat. And we'll do the best we can to help you out. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a few minutes to stretch your legs, get some fresh air, have a comfort break. And I do hope that you managed to vote as well. I think the audience vote should have closed by now, so we'll be busy tallying those. And at this time, I'm just really thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker for today, who's been kind enough to join us, Dr. Margaret Wheatley, or Dr. Meg Wheatley. Meg has many different roles. She's a speaker, teacher, consultant, advisor, a leader whose work has deepened into an unshakable conviction that leaders must learn how to invoke people's inherent generosity, creativity, and need for community, as this world tears us apart, and really feels that way right now. Sane leadership on behalf of the human spirit is the only way forward. And to me, that's the term of the day, sane leadership. It's been so lacking these last months. Meg is the co-founder and president of the Berkana Institute. She's an organizational consultant since 1973, a global citizen since her youth, and a prolific writer. She's authored 9 books, from the classic Leadership and New Science back in 1992 to Who Do We Choose to Be? Facing Reality, Claiming Leadership, and Restoring Sanity in 2017. Her newest work is actually an audio work, or a CD, The Warrior Songline, a journey into warriorship guided by voice and sound. Meg earned her doctorate in organizational behavior from Harvard in 1979, just as that field of organizational development was gaining ground. She's been honored for her work by many professional associations, universities, and organizations, and over the last 5 years has been training leaders and activists from over 35 countries as warriors for the human spirit. And that's an in-depth training program and path of service supported by a robust global community. In this really wild, crazy, troubling, anguished, hopeful moment, I can think of nobody better to join us than Meg. So please welcome her.
I am so delighted that we have a few minutes to be together. I first want to honor, with the deepest sense of my own emotional response, as well as intellectual response to all the 6 of you who presented. And I really want to build on that. First, I have no favorites, but I do need to tell the University of Rochester good people that that's where I graduated in 1966. But no preferences here, no preferences. What I really want to emphasize is 2 words that were presented by a few of the panelists, the judges. One was humility, and the other was caring. I have worked for many decades now with a principle I learned from one of the great elders in the field of organizational change, Marvin Weisbord. Marvin said, having done enormous levels of organizational change work, he said, I used to go into any system and ask what's wrong and how can I fix it? That's the old expert model, but I did that too. And then he realized after many failures, he said, I realized that's not the right question. It's not what's wrong and how can we fix it. It's what's possible here and who cares. So I was deeply impressed, as were some of the panelists, on the listening for and realizing how you were truly engaged at the heart and mind level by going into these communities, going into these systems. Now, some of you had more opportunity than others. I'm also deeply aware how many of the projects were about women, because that is a major issue. Now, for each of the projects that you did, for each of the maps that you created, you were very skilled at mapping the complexity of the system affecting the issue. But then you go out another level, which you didn't do, but I'm going to do for us right now. And all of these issues are embedded in cultures that have these powerful dynamics that actually act against change. And you were very quick to notice that. So we're dealing with complexity that is unending. The more you analyze a system, the more you try and map it, you get overwhelmed with the complexity of all these dynamics interacting. That's what's available to us when we map. And that's why humility is very easy to find in all of this, because it's truly humbling to see the level of interactions, interdependencies. But I want to pause and go back to the second word I introduced, which was caring. What's possible here is dependent not on which strategic or levers for change or strategic intervention points you define. What's really only possible is the level to which you yourself are engaged at a deep level of commitment. And secondly, finding those in the community who care. Because all change that I've ever witnessed, been part of, led, or studied is based on people at the grassroots level who truly care. But what this means for us is that we are not changing systems at the level at which they need to be changed. This is one of the great, it's not a dilemma for me, it's a profound realization of where we are. I've been working in systems change in sometimes in very high levels with, I thought, a lot of leverage. But we're now dealing with a world that is really tearing itself apart, where these major systems will not change because they're actually too bureaucratic. I described them in one of my books as morbidly obese bureaucracies. What we're seeing now is this groundswell of longing for life to be different for women, for children, for people of color, for the oppressed, for the migrants. All of these problems that, Peter, you laid out so well in the beginning, and also Mohammed did as well. This is the world in which you are going into. This is the world you're going into, beyond analysis, beyond the neat analytic. And I know it didn't feel neat to you at the time, but contrasting being able to pull all these things together and develop the interrelationships, going into the world, going into a community. Those of you who've been in communities will instantly know what I'm speaking of. What we encounter when we start implementing any of these maps is we encounter this overwhelming complexity, which makes us humble, but we also encounter the reality that nothing is neat, even in a complex system map. There's a deception and illusion that if we just find the right lever, we just find the right strategic intervention, then we will make change possible. But we have an egregious, terrible history of trying to change large systems at the level at which they need to be changed, and we have failed. This is just the reality of our time. That's why I want to introduce the second quote to you, which is from the great Czech leader Václav Havel, and it's about hope. He said, "Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well. It's the certainty that something is worth doing, no matter how it turns out." We have to have that dedication, that wholeheartedness, that I'm going to be doing this work because my heart mind has been awakened. I now see that this is something I am connected to as an activist, as an interventionist. This is the work that I need to be doing. So many activists that I work with say, I can't not do it. And I would like you to explore, in having developed these maps, whether that connection now is available to you. Because we're facing enormous challenges. there is no possibility of the level of change that's required. There is a lot of possibility at the local level. Those of you who have worked in the community, I call them now islands of sanity, where there's enough support, there's enough, and usually it's among the women, by the way, as you would have discovered, some of you, taking your work, your clarity, your commitment, your wholeheartedness is what I just want to point out to you. This world needs us. These issues need us, but we have to be prepared for failure. Not as a way of demoralizing us or depressing us. It's just the reality of this world. How many people I know, thousands of them, where we just watched our work get swept away by COVID. Before that, it was, economic collapse in '08. This world is what we have. It's not what we wanted. But now for you to take your systems analysis with complete wholeheartedness and to understand that the fundamental awareness of a system is that it's all about relationships. It's all about relationships. Those of you who worked in larger teams, think about even under adverse conditions of being separate, what was the importance of relationships? When you go into a community, you look to strengthen relationships or to become part of the community with your relationships. But that's what we need to mean by interconnectedness. It's all about how committed we feel to working together. This lovely phrase, we're all in this together. Well, there's not a lot of evidence that most people in the world believe that, but we know it's true. And so that needs to be a foundational faith that you have. I work with a definition of faith from Emmanuel Levinas, the great ethicist from Lithuania and France, who was alive and aware during World War II. He said, faith is not the belief in a God, it's believing that love without rewards is valuable. And it's this orientation that I just want to offer you as you go forward now, as you finish school, as you go into the world with your hearts filled with compassion, with your minds filled with an understanding of what needs to change or how these terrible problems are at the coalescent point of all these other issues. But basically, for you, and this is, I'm speaking to you as warriors for the human spirit, people who are set on doing the work that promotes human well-being, human health, human capacity, creativity, and kindness. You're already engaged in that work, and I want to hear your questions now, but really want you to understand that you've just entered into this domain of truly being a champion or a warrior for the people behind the issues that you just mapped so thoroughly and so well. So going back to Václav Havel, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well. It is the certainty that something is worth doing no matter what, no matter what. So now I'd just like to get your questions, please.
Sorry, I was muted. Meg, thank you so much. That was really beautiful. For all of you out there watching and listening today, we have some time for conversation with Meg. So please enter your questions or comments into the chat. Wherever you're watching from, there should be a chat feature. And if you enter that, they'll filter some of those questions through to me, and we'll try to get as many as we can to Meg to chat about in the next 10 or 12 minutes. Maybe I can start off, Meg. So much of what you said really resonated deeply, and starting with want to talk about this idea of humility and the context of leadership and the context of trust. You know, humility is not something that we often hear about in the kind of traditional definitions of leadership, but clearly so important, you know, here. And so, as all of the you know, students who've been working for months think about how to carry these projects forward and affect change in systems that have been broken or unequal, or unjust or oppressive, there are often deficits of trust amongst those who have been marginalized. And so
Take
you
out the
talked.
word often, Peter. Take out there are.
Yeah, you're
huge
right.
deficits
You're
of
right.
trust. Yeah.
Deficits of trust, which in my experience has always been one of the most challenging things to overcome. And you know, you rightly pointed out that there are going to be no quick fixes for systemic problems. That you know, that there are going to be false starts, there are going to be failures. How do you overcome those deficits of trust as someone who's trying to create change?
Yeah, well, one of my frustrations with the current leaping onto the issue of systemic racism is that I and many others were working on that issue back in the 60s and the 70s. And the only way you develop trust is by your actions. I also like Greta Thunberg's statement of hope. Hope is defined by our actions. Do our actions now give us a sense of a possible good future? So all of this right now is just talk. It may be very sincere, but we don't build trust. We create trust by people witnessing what we're doing on behalf of the issues. It just is totally focused on action at this point.
Thank you, Meg. I got some questions coming in already. So I'm going to begin with a question from Bruce. Meg, how do you recommend people begin their journey into this warriorship to make a positive difference in the world? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity for a commercial announcement. You go to my website, margaretwhittley.com, and you will be filled with descriptions, and you'll also get to listen to my new work, which is the journey we take if we want to train as warriors. It's called the Warrior Songline, right there on the homepage. So go and enjoy my website. But thank you for the question too. The sincerity, the longing behind it.
Next question, and do keep them coming in, is from Aman. Powerful words, Meg. My question to you is, how do you begin to change the system where so many elements are working towards retaining the status quo?
Yeah, well, I don't think you change whole systems. My book, So Far From Home in 2012, explained these systems are not capable of change because they're emergent. And that's one of the characteristics of living systems. They emerge, and then you can't change them by working retrospectively or working downward. I have worked, all of my colleagues have worked with, you can't know the system dynamics until you're inside working in the system. So we stand back, we create maps, we do analyses, but we really don't see enough of the system until we start working in it. So we've worked with a maxim for many years, which is start anywhere, get inside, where there are more allies, where there's good leadership, where people are in a state of readiness or desperation. Don't think about the big whole system. Get inside the system. So you start anywhere. And then once you're inside, then you follow it wherever you can. So this is being very opportunistic and very wise at the same time. And that's what I certainly encourage all of you who came up with these, a number of possible points of intervention. Just get inside with one of them, and then you'll see a whole host of other things that were not available, were not visible from the outside.
Thank you. Next question is coming from Iram. I hope I've pronounced it correctly. Thank you, Meg. It was such a lovely speech. Your mention of certainty in chasing something important is inspiring. How can one build a sustainable model for creating meaningful and impactful change?
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how do you build the internal faith, strength, and clarity, clear seeing, so you know where best to serve. Because the time for large scale systems change, you can read any of my recent books or articles, that time has passed. But we can still make great contributions at a more local level, as was obvious in Peru and the Australian South Sea Island presentations. So think about developing yourself for what's coming, because this level of strength and courage and perseverance is what is needed. It's what is needed.
Thanks, and let's build on the sort of perspective of communities, and this is coming from Project Adapt. How do you suggest that local communities start discussions around social innovation and complexity, and how can we enable effective systemic change together?
Well, please don't be so ignorant. People have been working successfully on how to create community-based change now for decades. Just do your homework, get on Google and find the resources. There's a handbook of change that my publisher, Barrett Kohler, keeps adding to. There's just an enormous, if you Google under community-based change, you'll find we know how to do this. So you just need to do a little more homework.
Sounds great. One of my old mentors used to use the phrase "history started when I showed up," as an admonishment to all of us to look back first and understand what's been done and what's been tried, and not reinvent the wheel.
I got my doctorate just when the field of organization development was really getting some ground underneath its feet. And what I've observed in 50 years of doing this work is we really did develop great processes of how to listen, how to host conversations, how to do stakeholder analysis beyond mapping. I mean, it's all there, it's out there. And now a lot of us are frustrated or tired.
And everyone else is waking up. And it's when you're entering a problem and there's a feeling of urgency, you want to just get your hands dirty and get to work. But oftentimes we need to do our homework and to take a step back. And that's a lot of what this process.
Thank you for bringing in the word urgency, because we have too much urgency and not enough thoughtfulness. And those of you who did these projects, you engaged in months of really trying to understand before you recommended actions, and we need more contemplation. But communities love being in conversations about what they care about, and then you find all this enormous creativity. I define sane leadership as having this abiding faith that people can be creative, generous, and kind. We have such a need to awaken this in people in their local communities, and that has been done in thousands and thousands of places. So it'd be fun to explore this as well. But beyond the sense, urgency doesn't get us anywhere except quicker failure. And so we really need time to understand, but not our understanding. Gather the community, give them resources, teach them how to listen to each other, and then they do tremendous work, far beyond what any outsider could do.
Great. Our next question is coming from Ashesi, the university in Ghana. Thanks for the powerful words, Meg. This is a great question, because a lot of our students around the world are graduating and going off into a world that feels really uncertain at the moment. How do we teach optimistic action without creating a bubble within our universities that makes students unprepared for the friction they may face beyond campus?
Okay, I love this question, because we don't have to create optimistic bubbles. We need to create good work for people, for students to get engaged in, opportunities to serve. I just wrote a little piece, it is up on my website, called Is the Glass Half Empty or Half Full? And there's only one right answer to that, right? You have to be an optimist these days because no one wants to be with people who are pessimists, or I call us realists actually. But so is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? So I changed that question. The real question for me and Warriors for the Human Spirit is, who needs this water that's right here? Who needs this water? And how are we going to get it to them? How are we going to get it to them? Let's stop worrying about our attitude, our general optimism, and just notice that in this world, there is so much work we could be contributing to. Let's just discover that and do it, and not hide behind some, well, this is too pessimistic, this is too dark, I don't want to talk about it. No, let's ask, what is the work that needs doing that I might contribute to? It's just that simple.
Thank you. Our judges are going to be back in a minute or two. Let's see if we can get through one or two more questions. I guess I want to ask you a question. The last couple of months, we talked about sort of the big upheavals that we're living through right now, the pandemic, the consequent sort of economic destruction, the real outpouring of anguish over racial oppression and inequality. And with each of these, what has struck me is that a lot of people who there seems to be much more talk about, we got to fix the system, we need to look at the system, we need to think about things really differently. The Wall Street Journal says we have to look at higher taxes and universal basic income, things like that, that are just kind of really uncommon, I guess. Do you think that this is a moment where there might be more fertile ground for beginning to affect the kind of deeper change in some of these systems? And are you kind of optimistic about where we are?
I don't care to be an optimist or a pessimist. I try and see clearly what's happening. And I try and see, as a systems thinker, all of the multiple dynamics that might be converging at this moment. So when you put together the case for equity against the recession or depression that we are in globally, how do people behave when they're in economic hardship? Do they want to get into more equity? Do they want to give away what they think is their piece of the pie? We have to watch how this plays out. There are such strong, volatile human emotions at play now that are mostly based on fear. And we know as humans, this is throughout the historic record, the archaeological record of humans, that fear brings out our worst behaviors. Survival. Love, which we saw a lot of in the COVID shutdowns, a lot of people caring for each other. Mm-hmm. We know that love creates possibility and fear just shuts it all down. So it's very simplistic, but for me, it's what I'm watching now. How are these different dynamics of love and fear going to interact when we get to economic justice, food justice, migration? Because there's going to be a lot more migration now with climate crisis, and people homeless. So we just have to watch this and then keep asking the question, so how can I serve this moment right now? What is the possibility of where I might contribute? Forget about the scenarios of the future. That's just completely absorbing and leads us into fear. I want us to be present, focused on service, and keep asking the question, what is the work that needs doing that I might contribute to? That's a good way to end.
That is a good way to end. I was thinking we could go on, but we can't. Meg Wheatley, thank you so much for sharing your time, your insights, and some wisdom with us. Let's all go forth and be warriors for the human spirit. Do check out Meg's work; it's extraordinary. Which, as she mentioned, you can find on her website or wherever you find good books. Meg, please feel free to stay with us if you want as we announce the winners. And thank you again for your time today. Fantastic. We have judges. I'm seeing them on my screen. And I think that means that we get to move into the final phase of today's event, which is announcing our winners. So before we actually begin to announce the winners, I wanted to see whether the judges would like to, or one judge representative just wants to share any general words for the finalist teams.
Hi, Peter, thanks. I'll speak just very briefly to say that first off, a huge congratulations to all 6 finalists. These were outstanding pieces of work that went far beyond just being an academic exercise. One of the things that the judges remarked on in particular is how the work that really stood out was when it was an expression of both heart and head and connected the whole of the teams, the whole of the systems, and that stood out for us in many, many different instances here. The other piece that stood out and just caught the last couple of words of Meg Wheatley's comments and really aligns with that, and that is that we were looking for possible points of action. People who were highly, highly committed to the topics that they had brought forward and who are clearly going to continue this work alongside those they have already been collaborating with and are bringing more people, more voices into the work as well.
Thank you, Jill, and thanks to all the judges. I'm sure your deliberation work has not been easy, but now we get to see the fruits of it. So we're going to begin by welcoming back Mohammed Amersi, and many of you voted over the last little while for the Audience Award, and I'd like to turn it over to Mohammed to share those results with us.
Peter, thank you very much. I had the benefit of being able to listen into some of the pitches, and I must say that they were very impressive. Year on year, congratulations to you and the team, the standard of the participants, the kind of problems that they want to try and solve, and more importantly, the way they think about solving those problems and their methodology, I think is extremely impressive. And I do not envy at all the very tough task that the judges would have had in navigating through these amazing people, amazing ideas, and the amazing impact. Whether they win today, they do not win today, they're certainly on a journey to make some significant change. Not only change on a small level, but change that I think is going to scale, and change that is hopefully going to result in some very, very improved lives. So based on what I've advised, that after 534 votes received from the audience, which is quite a large number of votes, the winner of the Audience Choice Award is Oxford University.
Wow.
So absolutely brilliant to Oxford for having won. And I congratulate them because it was a very tough competition. And in these times of the COVID-19 and other issues we have, to be able to put together a credible initiative and then to be able to talk some very impressive judging lineup through it, I think is highly commendable. So absolutely brilliant, Oxford. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Mohammed. And congratulations to the University of Oxford team for winning the Audience Award, which is worth £1,000. And thank you to all of you in the audience who voted. Very exciting. Let's move on now with the judges' prizes. So we have 3 awards, first, second, and third prize from the judges, as well as, of course, 3 runners-up, because our finalists today, made it from 3,500 teams. So let's take a minute again just to think about the scale of that accomplishment. I don't know exactly in what order you're doing this, so I'm just going to turn it over to the judges to take it away from here.
Thanks, Peter. It was a really hard decision, but in third place is University of North Carolina with their Using System Science to Advance Health Equity in Tobacco Control.
Well done.
I'm delighted to share that our second place winner today is the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. How is women's health affected by menstruation in the United States? Congratulations, team, and well done.
Bravo.
And
I heard before what sounded like a drum roll sound effect, so we have to make sure we just leave time for a drum roll, Joe.
And the first place is the University of Oxford, Violent Women and Modern Slavery in Papua New Guinea. Congratulations.
Wow.
Amazing. So for once, the judges are on the same wavelength as the audience. It's so good to see.
It's true. It doesn't happen that often.
So
yeah, really nice to see. Congratulations, congratulations, University of Oxford, and I see Shola and Freya here from the team. The rest of the team is popping up on my screen. Hello, everyone. Congratulations. One of you like take a moment to share a few words?
Peter, can I just ask one question? Was it unanimous amongst the judges, or was it a majority?
It was a very hard decision and unanimous.
Oh, wow. Okay, even better. Thank you.
We had some arguments over the other, the second and third, but it was unanimous.
And on which criteria were you really stuck, if there was one criteria of judging?
I think, I may be speaking out of turn here, but it was this sense of bringing together the head, heart, and the hand. So it wasn't just, if you like, an intellectual, technical, highly skilled analysis, but the enthusiasm, the emotion, and the participation of the team in that issue came across, I think, very strongly.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, Peter, I interrupted you.
No problem at all. Thank you. So, Team Oxford, anyone like to share a few words as you reflect on this big accomplishment?
Yes, I'll say a quick something. I think that we're massively shocked right now. I think that we're so appreciative, because I think all the submissions that we just saw over the last few days, I think, have just been like absolutely phenomenal, and we really couldn't even see ourselves competing. And we're so glad that you guys were able to kind of look through what we were doing and really see the value on it, because it was a massive labor of love that we went through, and we're glad that you guys were able to see that. I just wanted to really just make an acknowledgement of a lot of the people who have been working in this space for very many years, but behind the scenes, a lot of the grassroots, on the ground people and the activists that we kind of spoke to and that we work with, people like Sister Daisy Luciania and Cressida Koala and Alan Mogarema, people who are risking their lives every day to try to actually bring this. This is something that's kind of come to light for us recently, but they're literally putting their existences at risk to try to push this. And this is really who we're doing it for and who we want to be able to take this forward with. We also really want to be able to thank the Met System team and the Skull Center, particularly Anna Johnson, who has not only done an amazing job with the event today, but she's been really been with us every step of the way, and she's been a massive help in teaching us systems thinking and the methodology behind it. I'm so sorry if I've missed anybody, but I'm just like super shocked now. So, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you.
We're going to start
Thank you,
playing
judges. Thank you,
music
everybody.
to get you off the stage now anyways, just like the Oscars. Well done. And again, a congratulations and thanks to the teams from Asheshi, from University of Chicago, from Rochester. Again, extraordinary accomplishment for all 6 teams for being here today. We're really grateful to you for your work. And you know, this is just the beginning. So as we close up, first I just want to once again thank our judges, our speakers, Mohammed Amersi and Meg Wheatley, all of our supporters, Amersi Foundation, Skoll Foundation, Trico, McConnell, et cetera, all of our university partners, and particularly the educators at our 54 partner universities around the world who put a ton of time and effort into making this work at each one of the individual institutions. And I think we've created a really nice learning community around the world that will continue to grow together with this. And you know, to all of you out there, I hope that this is just the beginning of a learning journey and a change journey for many of you, that you can carry your projects forward. I hope you feel the weight of responsibility for all those who have entrusted, you know, their thoughts and insights and information with you in your research process, to share that with them and to continue to walk with them to create change, and let us know how we can help you in doing that. One last thought that I just wanted to share. It's not quite an announcement. It's kind of more of a thought bubble. But we've been reflecting a lot on where the world is and where the world is going, and what kinds of challenges and opportunities there are right now. And with our Go-To program, which is the kind of Map the System course that we run in Oxford at the Business School, we're going to dedicate next year to thinking at a systems level about how to build back better in the hopeful wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, and looking at building more resilient and more equitable and just systems across multiple different kinds of systems. And one thing I'd like to explore with all of you in our Map the System community is actually whether we might take this infrastructure and learning community and put all our collective brain power together and use Map the System next year to help us explore how we can take this moment to build back better. So we'll be reaching out to you in the weeks to come to talk about how we might do that together. You know, I think there's extraordinary possibility for us to contribute something really meaningful at a moment when it's really needed. So I love your insights and thoughts on that. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I look forward to those conversations. We're going to close. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Skoll Center team. Thank you, Tom and the AV team for doing this. Thanks to all of you around the world, especially those who are up at obscenely late hours to be a part of this. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Wear a mask. Stay humble. Thank you. Bye.